Hey there! So in this video we're going to take a look at loops. And so all programming languages use loops a lot, and there are two types of loops that we're going to look at. First one are called while loops. These continue as long as the condition is true. And the second one is called a for loop, and we use this in order to loop a specific number of times. And so we're going to use both, and both are used for different cases. First one we're going to take a look at is called the while loop. So I'm going to declare a variable here, and I'm going to set it equal to 0. And I'm going to say while x is, I need to put in brackets, while x is less than 10, I am going to increase the value of x by 1, and then I'm going to print the value of x to the console here. So I'm going to hit run, and what we see is, well, it starts off as 0, we increase it by 1, then we printed it out, so that's why we see a 1, and then it goes back to the beginning. 1 is still less than 10, so we keep on going, increase it by 1, now it's 2, print it out again, we see 2, it keeps on going over and over again until x is 10. And then it says, hey, 10 is not less than 10. So this is no longer true. It stops and the program ends. Okay? So that is the basics of a while loop. Cases where you might want to use this is if you want to play a game over and over again. So say you have a simple game like your rock, paper, scissors or something. And say, okay, well, after they play a game of rock, paper, scissors, I want them to be able to play again. So we can use a while loop for that. And we can say, while they still want to play a game, so we might use a Boolean variable for that. Say, we want to play again, equals true, play around. Then at the end, you would say, do you want to play again? If yes, go back to the beginning of the loop and do it all over again. So that would be an example of something you'd use a while loop for. The next kind of loop is called a for loop. And for these, we use a iterator. It's a variable that we use to kind of increment on its own, much like how the x did, but a for loop has its own built-in variable that does that. And so we'll say let I equal 0. Is the first thing we put in. So I declare new variable. Often we use I. Sometimes we use j if we're using multiple, but I is standard for this. And then we say how long do we want to loop? We want to keep on looping while I is less than 10. And then the next thing we do is we say what do we want, how do we want to change I after every loop. And so we go I want to increase I by 1 every time. Okay, so this is a for loop. Inside the brackets there are 3 parts. First is declaring our counting variable, which is I in this case, and setting its initial value. The second is a condition of when this thing will stop. And the third is how do we change our counting variable every time we loop through this thing. And so this says increase it by 1. Quite frequently this is just going to be what the last one always is, and quite frequently we do start at 0. So the only thing that really changes is here, and this number here is telling us how many times do we want to loop through the thing. And so what we're going to do is just console log, and this time I'm going to print out that variable I that we got now. And this will, in fact, do almost exactly the same thing as what we saw before, but rather than going from 1 to 10, we're going to see that it goes from 0 to 9. Okay? So it starts off at 0, we printed it out, then we start the loop over again, I is still less than 10, so we increase I by 1, print it out again, now we get 1, and it keeps on going until I is now 10, but when it hits 10, it doesn't print it out the last time, it just stops. Okay? So this is what a for loop does, and this will loop 10 times. Basically, whatever number you have here, that's how many times it's going to loop. Most for loops look like this, but you can get creative with it. So for example, I can start at a different value, and I could say while it is greater than 0, so rather than saying less than 10, I can say greater than 0, so 10 is greater than 0, it will loop. If I do not change this, this will loop forever, which is something else we need to talk about. But rather than doing increase by 1, I am going to count down by 2 instead. So it starts off at 10, it's going to keep on going, actually we'll go greater than or equal to 0, and we're going to count down by 2 every time, and do the same thing. And what does it do? Starts at 10, then it counts down by 2, so 8, 6, 4, 2, 0. We include the 0 because we had this greater than or equal to. And so when it finally hit 0, it still did that one last loop and printed it out. So it's not normal to do this, but it can be useful sometimes. Usually you're just increasing it by 1, starting off at 0, and going up to how many times you want to loop. But there are times when you want to do something special with this iterator variable for whatever you're doing, where doing something more creative can be useful. So those are the 2 loops. Now let's take a look at a little bit more advanced stuff. So something you might see in a while loop. So this is a dangerous thing. This is called a while true loop, or an infinite loop. This loop will continue forever. If I don't, we'll say print hello. This is dangerous. Let's see what happens. So remember, a while true loop will continue while the condition is true. If I put true in there, that means it's going to go forever because this is never going to be false. If I run it, oh, not print, sorry. I've been doing some Python as well. Console.log is the equivalent to print in Python. Let's do it again. There we go. It's just going. It's going and going and going. It's going. It's printing forever. It's not going to stop. So we can stop an infinite loop by hitting stop here. It might take a little bit of a time for it to clean up, but eventually it will stop, but not automatically on its own. Okay? So be careful of these things. Sometimes they can be useful though, because we can do something like this. So I'm going to do an input. I'm going to create a new variable. I'm going to say let x equal prompt. Do you want to stop the loop? And then I'm going to check that. I'm going to say if that variable that I created, x, is equal to the string yes, I want to stop that loop, then we're going to stop the loop. And the way that we do that is by using the command break. Okay? So this will now loop forever. It'll say hello, then it'll ask me if I want to stop. If I do not say yes, it will do it all over again. But if I say yes, that will trigger this if statement, which will break the loop and stop the entire program. So, hello, do you want to stop the loop? I'm going to say no. No does not equal yes, so it skips this, goes back to the beginning, says hello, do you want to stop the loop again? If I put in yes, program stops. Okay? So that is what break does. There is one other thing that we can do with loops rather than the break, and that is what's called continue. Let me show you what that does. So I'm going to say if x equals no, I'm going to do continue, and we'll see what this does. Then I'm going to have one more thing down here. end of loop. Okay? So every iteration we're going to see hello. It'll ask us if we want to stop the loop. If we say yes, it'll stop. If we say no, it's going to do this continue thing. And then it's going to do end of loop. So let's see what happens. So if I put in just random nonsense, it prints out end of loop because it wasn't equal to any of those. So end of loop, starts over, asks a question again. But what if I put in no? Now we don't see this end of loop. We see it go back to hello. What this continue does, it says stop the current iteration of the loop, go back to the beginning, and start over. So when I said, do you want to stop the loop? I said no. So this was true. And then it says continue. Continue says, okay, stop here. Don't continue on to the next line. Go back to the beginning and do it all over again. That's what continue does. It stops the current iteration and goes back to the beginning. While break will stop the current iteration and exit the loop entirely. Okay? So if I say yes, it stops. We can use these a little bit. Try to avoid using break and continue if you can. Ideally, what you should be doing when you're working, especially with these while loops, is using the condition here in order to stop your loop. You can use break in order to stop a loop, and you can use continue to stop an iteration, go back to the beginning, but try to avoid it if you can. Work with using the correct condition to stop it, and that will make it a whole lot easier for people to read your code, because they say, oh, this is a while loop that's going to continue while this thing is true or false. But if you do a while true and then you exit your loop with a break somewhere else, then they have to go and dig through the entire loop, find that break, and then figure out, okay, what is actually stopping this loop. Whereas if you put a condition there, it's very clear what it is that's going to stop it. All right? So that is loops in a nutshell. So we took a look at while loops, we took a look at for loops, saw how we can play around with both. We looked at break and continue. Break and continue also work with for loops. You typically don't ever do it with for loops. They're usually something you just do with while loops, but they do work with for loops as well. So we're going to stop there and enjoy the rest of your day.